Cyrus, welcome to the Building and Growing podcast. We're delighted to have you here today.
Fantastic to be invited and to be part of this. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So, Cyrus, do you mind starting with, say, an introduction to yourself? You are a serial entrepreneur. Before we dive into what your latest venture is.
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a child of the world, just like you. I've been fortunate to live in lots of different places and meet amazing people. And I don't know, maybe school wasn't my thing. I loved learning,
Yes.
but the environment in which things were done didn't really suit me. So I took a path of going my own way, sports and life.
Fantastic.
And then that because I was always fascinated by learning and being with people and sharing stuff with people, it naturally led me to entrepreneurship. So I can't remember that 17-year-old, but I've always tried to figure stuff out. And I think my first proper startup was like in I think it was in early 2000, in the early 2000s, and I launched a speed dating business.
Oh, wow.
Which was I wanted to start a high-end speed dating business.
And you must have been one of the first, the early 2000s.
So I was one of the first. I heard about the concept in France.
Yes.
Really liked it, and I thought, wow, I know loads of single people and who are interested in relationships.
Yes.
Why don't I bring it over? But I do it with a twist. So we do something not high end, but something where champagne reception, and then the speed dating is going to be not 3 minutes, but it's going to be 8 minutes, and we're going to have foie gras, champagne, and that kind of thing. And that's so that I think that was the first proper organized venture I had.
Yeah, you planted the seed for Tinder.
Yeah.
Incredible. Though, I mean, it certainly does seem like a much more interactive version.
It was cool because, so back in the days, I was working in wine.
Yes.
And I would bring my customers, restaurants who bought wine from me, I would bring them, I don't know, 40, 50 people for an evening. My customer would be happy.
Yes.
They would drink my wine for the evening. So it was a win-win situation. Couples got formed. We even had two couples that got married, children. Wow. So it was a good time.
Yeah,
but things are much better now, maybe. Not maybe, for sure. Now I think with every, all the app worlds and everything, things are more exciting.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great insight into how it was in the olden days, and perfect alignment, it seems, with, your customers and your business.
Yeah,
which
for sure.
Is great. The sort of, I always find that alignment leads to the best outcomes.
Yeah, it's a question of timing, and I do really feel that when and this is true in a lot of things, marketing, and you've got so much experience in that, you know that partnerships are some of the hardest things to do.
Yes.
Because you need that alignment between every party taking place.
Yep.
Oftentimes you think you've got a fantastic partnership, but the other party isn't going to bring in the work that you expect, or you're not going to bring what they expect, and so it's hard. Sometimes things just align, and those are the best working partnerships.
Yeah, fantastic. So started off with, you mentioned the wine industry, the speed dating. What was next?
So what was next? I stayed in the wine industry for quite a while. I studied wine out of a pure coincidence when I was living in Bordeaux. Studied because I thought, wine, how difficult can it be? A bunch of people drinking wine? I can do that. And then I realized it was a fascinating world, fell in love with it. Started, I worked pretty much at every position in the wine world. And then I was working for a very large wine producer in Burgundy. We owned over 70 estates, mainly in Burgundy, Rhone,
Yes.
but also overseas in the US, in South America. And I was taking care of the UK market for them.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a client which used to sell Chablis from us. So we were a very large Chablis producer. And Hilton Hotels, we had pretty much all the big restaurant and hotel groups. And Hilton Hotels was basically kind of complaining of price rises. And I was telling them that it's not the price the problem. He was like, I'll stop buying because otherwise people aren't going to buy. It's going to be too expensive. You're increasing your prices, but it's Burgundy. We don't produce a lot of wine. If production goes down, prices have to go up.
Yes.
And sat down, and then I said, the wine isn't going to sell, not because of the price has gone up, it's because your staff isn't trained.
Yes.
And so this conversation started. So I went out and said, if I train your staff, we're going to increase prices. So we're like kind of a bet. And I said, I'm going to go and train one hotel. Mm-hmm. We look at the outcome on sales.
Yes.
And we chat. And so sales shot up.
Fantastic.
And then he said, okay, you're going to train all my hotels. And I was like, this isn't how it works. I've got like 96 importers across the country. I've got I don't have time to do this.
Yes.
And so we thought, okay, why don't we do training videos? And then, okay, how do we know who's trained, who's not trained? And we started this online training solution for the hospitality industry. And I left my wine group in Burgundy, raised a bunch of cash, started this business and grew it with restaurant groups, hotel groups.
Fantastic.
In Europe and a bit in the Middle East as well.
Yeah.
So that was my first proper, venture-backed business.
Yeah, and you really solved the problem for yourself. That demand from the hotel group to train every single hotel.
That's how it. Yeah, that's how it worked. That's how it worked. Yeah.
That's awesome. Love it. And indirect sales is a really key channel. So if companies that invest in their partners' staff are the ones that do end up with really powerful and good outcomes. So that's a great example.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the reality of. So I was fortunate enough. I had worked in the hospitality industry and take care of people well enough.
Yes.
And without wanting to sound like Zig Ziglar, solve other people's problems, and the money will come. Don't try. Things will work out. Solve their problems, and the problem for hospitality industry was selling quality wine, more margin, more cash margin.
Yes.
And if I can solve that for them, then it'll work out.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So yeah, I agree.
It did. Which is great. And since then, you've now entered the health tech space with Sleepyhead. Do you want to start to discuss that, or were there any other sort of key milestones that you want to touch upon first?
No, I think one of the greatest startups I was after the online training solution, which I think wasn't aligned with really who I was. This B2B kind, it worked really well.
Yes,
but really, the whole wine space. I launched a startup called Vinoa, where we, through a very special technology, rebottled fine wines from large bottles into miniatures, and we started a subscription service where you would taste some of the world's best wines, alongside an interactive training. So that was amazing, because there I really had to dive into online marketing, online acquisition, and it's so savage, that world of wine. Yes. Nobody makes a margin, so being very good at marketing it is extremely difficult.
Yes.
And what I learned by leading this business and growing it was online marketing.
Yes.
And when we sold the business, and I didn't want to do anything, but ended up working as a consultant or advisor in growth and marketing.
Okay.
For a few businesses, I realized, damn, I'm actually not bad. These things that we've worked on,
Yes.
in other industries where there is margin, work pretty well. And that got me in love with the whole, growth and acquisition and, models that allow you to acquire customers and be very efficient at it.
Yes,
So that's
fantastic.
basically, that was really what, in a way led me to the sleep world. And no, it's not wine that led me to the sleep world, but it's more the marketing side. Yeah.
Yeah, and that passion for the funnel. And I think one thing that it gets talked about a lot, but not necessarily understood, is the passion that one needs to have for the incrementals along the way. Every little bit counts.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm thinking of so many times where people think they've got an idea, this is what I'm going to do and this is going to be the outcome, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, this hasn't worked. But no, it's like, how can we break it down into how many different bits can we break it down?
Yes.
Look at each. Is there anything that we can do to improve it? And those little incremental improvements compounded throughout a whole customer journey, and suddenly you've got something that can be very, very interesting.
Indeed, that's it. Love it. So it was the growth and that passion for acquisition that led to Sleepyhead rather than the passion for wine.
Yeah. So Sleepyhead was just like any other business. It's about meeting people.
Yes.
And I think, I don't know whether it's the same for you, Lucas, but for me, every business is about people, and it's about the journey together with other people. And
Yes.
I want to have fun in what I want to be like. I'm fascinated by what I do.
Yeah.
I love it. I could do it day and night, but I want to do it with people, that are fascinating to me, that I want to, that I want to team up with. And I met someone called Stephanie Romashevsky a few years back. I was working for a startup that did headphones to help people sleep.
Okay.
I met, the leading insomnia clinician in the UK, Stephanie Romashevsky.
Yeah.
She spoke to me. She told me about something called chronic insomnia. And I realized that, we weren't treating it, and it's a problem that's so huge, 10% of adult population, and there is a treatment that exists, but hardly any specialists to treat people. And so, I immediately, when I met her and I saw that what she did was so amazing, I was like, okay, we got to work together. But she was, it's about timings. We spoke about these partnerships and things. You've got to be aligned. And I don't think we were aligned. She was also looking at how can I digitalize this? And, it's just waited, we stayed in touch. And then a couple of years down the line, we were aligned. She was always wanting to really do something to solve this massive problem. So just to give you an idea, 10% adult population, 500 million people around the world suffer from chronic insomnia.
That's huge.
I'm not even going to go, because if there are people who are listening to this, I don't want to remind them of what the media is saying to them day in, day out about the effects on the health, mental health, physical. They know it. So there's a treatment that is highly effective.
Yes.
But there are just less than 1,000 practitioners around the globe who can do this. So if we don't have a digital solution, we're not going to solve this problem, or we're going to solve it for a very few. And that's not, what I'm about. If there is a treatment, it drives me crazy to know that people are suffering with for no reason, just because they don't have the money to pay one of these practitioners, which you can imagine is going to be expensive if you have to study so much and what you do is about your time, then you're going to have to charge a lot. So I find it unfair, and that's why we decided to, all right, let's solve this problem. We're going to solve this problem, and we're going to do it in a caring, empathetic way.
Yeah, fantastic.
But online.
Okay. And so, you're really bringing the approach of these 1,000 practitioners. You're democratizing access to that, to the market. Are you able perhaps to touch upon what the traditional approach may have been versus what you're doing and how that's different?
Yeah, I think so. It's a treatment it's a treatment that brings together different psychological approaches.
Okay.
One of them being CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes.
This treatment approach is called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia.
Yes.
However, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is just one of 7 or 8 different components that are brought together to do this treatment. And there's many different ways to do this treatment. It's a bit like physiotherapy for sleep. Okay. So you have a broken back, you go to the physio, they're going to bring in different approaches. So they're going to bring in, first of all, the mechanics. How do we fix your limping? How do we fix that? We're going to get you to get those mechanics right. Then we're going to have to touch on your muscles.
Yes.
Is every muscle firing right? We're going to have to get that working. We're going to work on your flexibility. Is there anything that's impacting? So you work on that, and then you're going to work on that strength of the muscles, and you're going to work on something called proprioception, which is how quick your nerves can send up the signal that you're kind of moving a bit too much this way, and shoot up so that the muscle activate. This is a mix of different things that the physio is going to do.
Yes.
Now, this is what we do with sleep. So we first of all understand what are some of the things that this person is doing that's ruining their sleep.
Yes.
So basically, long-term insomnia like this is a broken brain pattern of sleep. It's a broken program. Imagine it like, you've got, I don't know, Windows on your computer, and when it starts going all over the place, it's not going to suddenly come back. That's it. You're going to have to sort it out. And so things that sound normal are actually some of the reasons that are causing the insomnia. So like you've had a terrible night, okay? You've slept 2 hours. Normal thinking would be tomorrow night, during the night, you're thinking, I'm going to only sleep 1 hour. And it's horrible because I've got a meeting, etc. You start thinking, what's the first thing? Tomorrow night, I'm going to go to bed early. I'm going to catch up. Longer. And that is the worst thing that you could possibly do.
Wow, yeah.
And so understanding some of what's going wrong, breaking down that broken sleep program. So we break it down through different exercises that we give you.
Yes.
And we replace that with a healthy sleep program. Then through, again, different teachings and exercises.
Yes.
So someone who suffers from long-term insomnia has a physiological inability to sleep normally.
Okay.
So imagine like you've been, we were talking about the backache.
Yes.
If you've had, chronic back pain for ages, you're not going to run a 5K, right? Because you don't have so that muscle is going to take time. So we're going to like couch to 5K, that thing. So we're going to train people. Let's train you to sleep 6 hours in one block.
Yes.
With quality sleep. Then when we can do that, we're going to add 15 minutes, 30, and incrementally, progressively over an amount of time, we're going to increase. So first of all, we work on the quality, then we increase the quantity of sleep until you're getting what your goal is. And then finally, we're going to work on prevention of future relapse. We're going to work around, anxieties of certain scenarios that you can imagine. If you've been suffering from, insomnia for 10 years, you can imagine that it's not because you're sleeping now 7.5 hours straight that you're sorted. So we have to also make sure that we ingrain those results. We strengthen the results. We maintain the results over time.
Yes.
And that this program is firing, and they have the sleep program of a healthy sleeper and the strength of a healthy sleeper.
Yeah, fantastic.
So that's, I hope it clarifies it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose it's an approach to get people to progressively improve their sleep patterns. You mentioned that CBT was a part of it. There may be other approaches and exercises that you take the clients through in order to progressively build up to those positive outcomes. And so again, the incrementals have snuck back into the conversation.
For sure. So, we typically with a practitioner, you'd go to 6, 9, 12 sessions.
Yes.
Spread out every other week or every week. They would inquire about what's wrong with your sleep.
Yes.
They would tell you about how sleep really works. Like I told you, the worst thing you can do is go to sleep early.
Yeah.
They'd explain why. And then they'd give you a few things to do until next week when I see you again.
Yes.
And then we're going to look at how did it go with the exercises I give you, what are the changes. Now we go into a second session. We're going to continue working on this, and we repeat it. So basically what with the web, you can reproduce that.
Yes.
And you can make it even better, because the practitioner doesn't have time to text you every morning. How did it go, Lucas?
Yeah.
Lucas, are you okay? I know that at this moment in time, you're probably super anxious and that things are tough, but remember ABC. And this is what we can do with a mobile app or a web app. And this is basically where we thought with Stephanie, how can we bring what she's doing and make it even greater online?
Yes.
And that's, that was at the heart of it. And, we realized that, this CBTI was great, but it's hard. CBTI is a bit like, telling someone who's had a chronic back problem and is massively overweight, okay, you're going to lose weight and you're going to go and run 5K every morning. Dude, do you realize, people don't realize, how difficult it is, how mentally challenging it is.
Yeah.
And so we bring in other techniques and approaches that we take from other disciplines, from weight loss, for example. I spoke to you about weight loss, from athletics, we bring these in and incorporate them to help people succeed. Because, sadly, CBTI works if you do if you adhere. A bit like dieting works if you eat less.
Yes.
But this is pretty, we know that, right?
Yeah.
But getting someone to stick to a diet, lose the weight and keep it off is we wouldn't have a massive obesity problem throughout the world if it was easy,
Yeah.
So this is where we concentrate. How do we make it achievable?
Yes.
And so this is what we're, and in humility, we're very good at. It's keeping people on the path of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it would be really good to dive into some of those metrics and understand what they look like, particularly because when you start conversations with investors, and you're building a product that you want to distribute globally, these key success metrics are ultimately what they're after.
You're right. And, even before we start talking about investors, going back to, what we were saying earlier, bring people what they want and you'll succeed, right? And
Yes.
what they want is to sleep normally again. Like people, someone who's got insomnia and I'm, the terrible thing about insomnia, if whoever's watching us now, listening to us now, doesn't have insomnia, I'm sure they have someone around them that has insomnia.
Yeah.
And sadly, the first thing we do, what do we do when we have someone we love, that has insomnia? What do? Facebook post on how to sleep better, we tag them.
Yes.
There is, we hear a TV show on sleep, we're going to tell them about it. And we don't realize how belittling that is, as if, one little magic technique, or, you know what, you should try lavender, or sleep hygiene. All this is belittling to someone who is in extreme, don't sleep for a couple of hours. I've had insomnia for a couple of months.
Yeah.
The pain is horrible. The mental charge is horrible. Our patients have sometimes had it. Most patients have had it around 10 years. Some for 25 years.
Yeah.
Constantly being told, oh, have you tried warm bath? Is belittling. It's like they didn't have a problem and they could do something. Get off your phone.
Yeah.
Do we realize? And we don't. And I tell you this, not because I'm accusing anyone. I've done this with, my mum suffers from insomnia. I've tried to tell her, you should try this, you should. And it's extremely belittling. So my focus was, we're going to take these people on, give them a big hug and tell them, we hear you. We know what you're going through.
Yes.
And we're going to hold your hand. And we're you still are going, you're going to have to do the exercises, but we're going to make it as easy as possible. So our very first focus was not on hitting those metrics for investment, but it was to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And so I think it's first and foremost, and be honestly extremely hard with yourself. Look at those numbers, and do they look good enough for you solving the problem?
Yes.
Forget investment and everything. And so that's what we focus on, is, are we helping the people we want to help?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's super important, because ultimately, this is about driving better outcomes for the 500 million people that you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast.
Changing their lives, saving their lives. And I'm not, it's not I'm not massive exaggeration.
No, absolutely.
We are saving people's lives, literally.
Yeah. I mean, the impact of insomnia, it could almost be the start of a lot of other problems and conditions in terms of mental illness, in terms of weight gain or weight loss. So it's very much, I would think, a gateway to many other issues. And so preventing them from occurring by addressing insomnia earlier, I think will definitely benefit the lives of these people as well as those closest to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But do you want to dive into the metrics? I can see a smile. Let's talk about the metrics if you want.
I mean, I think that, because one of the reasons that I'm eager to dive into the metrics is because when we think about health tech, a lot of people talk about telehealth and about companies like Babylon and such, which are all about connecting health services and individuals, and it's not as much of there's not necessarily a clear problem that's being solved. It's a lot more about efficiencies and the delivery of service, whereas this is very much about a problem that's being solved by individuals that people can relate to. But ultimately, you do need to fund it. You need money to get it done, and so that's why I think it's almost when you think about impact investing or ESG, a lot of people dismiss it and say, actually, there's never a return. But in this case, I think that there could be a return.
I think there are many use cases where there can be a return for investment in health tech. I think there's so much that we can do, around with what everyone has in their pocket today, and what the power that this has and what it can bring people. I mean, we're only at the very beginning, bring in, augmented reality, virtual reality, bring in metaverse.
Yes.
And now we're looking into I can't even, there's some of the things, we have no idea what can be done with everything. So I think that it can solve some unbelievable health problems that today are maybe not solved in the best possible way.
Yes.
And if you're solving a problem like, take 500 million sufferers, obviously not everyone has the appetite to go out there and get treated.
Yeah.
Reality is they don't know also that there is a treatment. So that has a definite play into this. But when you have a pain point like insomnia, you're ready to pay. And if it's been going on, you're ready to pay. And I think that people with insomnia
Yes.
are used to paying out of pocket, which is not the reality with every health condition.
Yes.
They're used to paying out of pocket because they've tried, most people with insomnia, I think that I was looking at this stat, I think 96% of the people who join us have
Yes.
tried multiple treatments before and failed.
Okay.
So most of them will have, downloaded a meditation app, a mindfulness app. Many of them will have gone to do hypnotherapy, sleep hygiene, aromatherapy, and what have you. So they Dr. Google was their go-to because, the systems in place today weren't helping them.
Yes.
So we're lucky enough to be in a space where people are ready to pay out of pocket, which means that I immediately got attracted to the B2C space as opposed to going to employee benefits or going towards the NHS and working those systems.
Yes.
And for other reasons as well. But I think that today that means that if you're an investor, there are many directions businesses can go to solve this and other problems.
Yeah.
And there are returns down the line. If you look at pharmaceutical companies today, these guys have made quite a bit of money on solving pain points.
Yes.
And doing it digitally is just another way of treating. It's another medicine. It just doesn't have an active molecule in it, and it's an app.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think SaaS companies do have, some pretty sizable margins at times, particularly when you reach the scale, of say the total addressable market of 500 million, which has been it's huge and it's a very positive outcome. Are you able to talk a little bit about maybe how you've built the product in order to scale? Are you localizing for different markets? What's the journey looking like there?
So when we started, I approached it really with that growth mindset. So I was like, okay, I'm going to sell this on different markets. I'm going to look at what's my direct to consumer. There ain't any lying in direct to consumer. You don't have a friend who's got a company who can help. You go direct to consumer, and metrics speak for themselves.
Yes.
Everything is. So I went out. I sold in the US, in Canada, the UK, Europe, and then took all this data back and looked at what is my cost per acquisition.
Yes.
What's my CAC on each one of those, and they're all pretty much the same. But when we launched it, it was only a video course with no, there was no human element to it.
Yes.
That was right at the beginning. And so looking at the data, we were selling the product super high end. So we were £400, $550 or something like that. And I was realizing that the retention wasn't good. And so started speaking to people. Why you just paid $500? Why haven't you started the therapy yet? And people are scared. And then I thought, okay, what would you need? I had so many questions. So would you like to speak to live therapist. And so, okay, how do we figure this out? So I spoke to Stephanie and we're like, okay, how do you do it when you do it with the NHS? So she builds insomnia programs for the NHS professionals. So if you're a doctor or a nurse and you've got chronic insomnia, she'd build the programs for the NHS to treat those people.
Okay.
So I wanted to figure out how they did it there. So how can we reproduce it? And so we decided to bring live therapy. So our customers could ask their questions and get help from a sleep expert.
Yes.
And from there, we realized that not very many people were coming. Then we started doing a community side, so peer, buddies that are going through the therapy with you. So you're not alone because it's tough.
Yeah.
And that improved our retention.
Yes.
And then we decided, let's do group videos, video clinics.
Yes.
And that worked extremely well.
Yeah.
On a couple of points, people took part. And a lot of people came but they didn't ask questions, but they were getting an enormous amount of help. And when I had them on the phone, they loved it.
Yes.
Never asked a question, but they loved it. And it helps them because they hear other questions being posed.
Yes.
And then we realized how powerful this was. And so to bring us back to the cost of acquisition, we started having, live video clinics, group clinics at 7 a.m. for people in Australia.
Yes.
And then 9 p.m. for people on the west coast of the US. And it was very hard to do. And so we decided, you know what, we'll focus on one single geography, one time zone.
Yes.
And so we decided because all the cost per acquisitions were the same, we focused on the UK.
Fantastic. Yeah. I really like what you mentioned about the peer support groups, because I think in mental health, in the mental health industry, they've seen a lot of really positive outcomes. I'm thinking about some work that my father did with the Hearing Voices Network, and there was such a big focus on recovery and getting people with lived experiences to come together to facilitate sessions so that people would learn from each other instead of, let's say, being instructed by other people. So I think it's a fantastic way to build trust and drive good outcomes.
I never thought it would be as great as it is, and we've got communities now, groups that peer-to-peer support is nobody, unless you've been in those shoes and walked that walk, nobody knows what it's like.
Yes.
So no disrespect to people who are doing research around, but unless you've done, part of CBTI and you've lived that anxiety of not sleeping for 20 years, you don't know what it's like. So we could, I can try and coach you as much as I can. I can give you everything. But the reality is you have to go and do some of that stuff. And what goes on in a human's mind, unless you've experienced it, you don't know.
Yes.
And the best way for me to find out is to be with people and we're there helping them, and we can see people interacting, and we don't want to be in that conversation, because that conversation between themselves is we can't add anything to that conversation.
Yes.
So I agree with you that in so many, and especially when we're talking mental, the human mind is something that's very complex, and in mental health, unless you've been in those shoes, we can try to understand, but we don't really live it. We haven't lived it. So
yeah, that's it. I think it's really good that across the board, lived experiences and learning from peers is becoming such a big trend, and it's important for many different communities. Insomnia, mental health, these are just two of many
for sure.
I think groups that
for sure. I think that there's huge power in that, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I I'm always eager to discuss investment, but before we dive into that, I have another question about the product and about Sleepyhead in terms of the roadmap. So what's coming up next that is really exciting you?
That's a really good question because we launched completely bootstrapped, put in, each put in a bit of money, and we launched as a MVP, what's his name? Lean startup, Ryan, well, I forgot. Anyway, would be proud of us because MVP, he says you've got to be ashamed of your product when it comes out. And I tell you what, I was ashamed of that first product, because I'm always seeing, those two steps, and I'm like, oh, we need to be better, because as soon as it comes out, I start speaking to our customers, and they're like, oh, and I'm like, oh, already there. And so we grew as a web app.
Yes.
So we're a website. Is that the best experience we can bring? No. And that next step is having our mobile app. So this is the big, exciting next step in the roadmap.
Yes.
Is taking what we've built, this unbelievable, I call it a sleep retraining program, with unbelievable, personalization inside, depending on how you're progressing, how your sleep is progressing, on how anxious you are, and taking that and bringing it into an app where I can perfect or at least try to perfect the delivery of all the support that we bring.
Yes.
And to really hold you, by the hand throughout the journey.
Yeah.
And so this is the big one that, we're looking at launching beginning of next year.
That'll be fantastic, particularly I think when it comes to pushing out those notifications to the phone in a way which web apps, can't necessarily do.
Email is, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think there's, when you look at the statistics and engagement with push notifications relative to emails, the numbers speak for themselves. And that's why they've been such a key channel for different apps. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, that is getting me excited on a few levels. Number one, is because we're going to be able to improve the user's journey, and the comfort that we bring them to a whole other level. And secondly, because retention and those metrics you were talking about in health tech, we're already. I didn't really dive into benchmarks. I did, people were telling me, this is the retention day one. I was like, let's build a great product. And, it's only when I started fundraising that I realized how good we were and that we were real outliers.
Wow.
So they were like, the benchmark, if you can hit retention at day 14 at 25%, you're gold,
Yes.
I'm like, 2 weeks, 25%. Is that the gold standard? I'm like, damn. And we're like 3x that.
Wow. Fantastic.
And this is people, anyway, from trial. So I was like, if we do this with a web app, what can we achieve with a mobile app?
Absolutely.
And where I don't like those metrics is when people try and move the metric as opposed to what the metric means. And for me, getting, I looked at some studies of some of the online CBTI that exists today.
Yes.
And, a lot of the online, if they hit completion, if it's over 20%, you're, average is 18%.
Wow.
So, it's effective, but 18% of people, I'm like, this is scary. I can't, I find that unacceptable from me as a target. And thankfully, we're a lot more than that. and still I'm unhappy,
Yes.
because it means that, you know, the people that you can be effective at 70%, you know, but 70% of 18% is, you know, if you start playing, you know, again with incremental improvements,
Yes.
I don't think it's acceptable, or I would be pleased with myself with anything less than 60% completion.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm, you know, especially with the tech that's out there today, just put ourselves in the user's, you know, seat. And maybe that's due to the fact that many of these players have gone down the B2B route, so employee benefits.
Yes.
And so what they do is, you know, we're efficacious to this percentage, but if people aren't finishing it, you don't. It's not this. You're not measured in the same way.
Yeah.
In the B2C space, if you're not keeping people, you're a dead man.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so, you know, I'm not driven by those metrics, but I'm driven by what those metrics represent. A bit like if you've got a restaurant,
yes.
and your aim is to have 5-star on TripAdvisor, there's a lot of things you can do to get those 5 stars.
Yes.
What should be happening is that you please everyone that comes through the door and you bring them a superb experience. The metric is just a way of showing it, but if you become too metrics-centric, then you're trying to move the metric rather than what the metric is trying to show you.
Yeah. I think there was a famous sort of saying: as soon as you make something a KPI, you lose it. It no longer becomes effective.
I'd be interested to know who said that. I'd love to look into that, because I was, you know, and thinking, you know, when I started seeing other comparative metrics.
Yes.
But then I can understand why people go there, because when you're speaking to investors and they tell you this is what you've got to hit,
yes,
you're thinking this is the actual metric, and it's the metric I need to work on, rather than, you know, I want that at least 2 in 3 of everyone I treat is coming out and we've changed their lives.
Yeah.
It's not about, you know, 60% retention on day 100.
Yes. And so, you know, given that the current environment is a difficult fundraising environment, what's your experience been like for this current funding round?
So first of all, I have to say that I'm every morning, you know, I wake up and I realize how lucky I am to live in London and to be based in what is, you know, an extremely vibrant city in terms of investment. So,
yes.
You know, I'm from the southwest of France. I'm not living in the southwest of France in you know, back home in Bayonne or Biarritz, and I have one VC to speak to, and if I don't get him, that's it, pretty much. Yeah. So I'm extremely lucky, but at the same time, you know, we're humans, so we always look at what we don't have. And I look at this environment, and you know, I was fortunate. We raised a tiny round with some really cool VCs at the end of last year, 2021, and you know, we were trying to build a V1 of our therapy program and test sales and grow, which we did. Things went super well, and then we were like, okay, we'll raise at the end of you know, Q2.
Yes.
And then things went a bit crazy. Started emailing, you know, approaching VCs, getting intros. Absolutely no answer.
Yeah.
The whole consensus, I think, was let's wait and see what's happening with valuations at the top. Everything's collapsed. How do we, you know, figure that down all the way to pricing at seed level?
Yes.
So it was difficult. September came. I knew that nothing was going to happen over summer. September came. I was hoping there'd be a bit more vibrancy, but
yes.
You know, as you've seen in the data, like investment numbers have, you know, fallen quite dramatically.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm in London, so I'm fortunate. I'm getting those discussions. We're speaking to quite a lot of VCs. There's a lot of interest. I wish there was a bit more. Some of the VCs in Europe were a bit more American.
Okay.
You know, and this is a feeling, and I might be wrong, but in a lot of B2C models, I don't think it's very European. You know, I think because there's high risk, you know, and it's hard to predict.
Yes.
You know, branding, marketing, etc., is hard to predict and understand. So I think there's less risk for European VCs are less risk takers, and that's why, you know, most of the great B2C models come from the US, because they have that appetite for risk better than here. And I think that also this whole thing makes, you know, Headspace, Calm, two amazing B2C apps.
Yes.
That are, I think between them, they do 75% of the meditation app world. So both UK started, both went to California to raise and go on. Is it indicative of you know, maybe maybe it's not, but sadly it's kind of, when you speak to different people, I think there's more appetite for this on the other side of the pond than there is in Europe.
Okay, and you know, I think that's very interesting, because the risk appetite, you know, sometimes with high risk there does come high reward. So it's interesting to hear that, you know, maybe on this side of the pond, the VCs are a little bit more conservative, but maybe now with, you know, VCs from the US approaching Europe and the UK due to the weaker pound and
the sales.
Yeah. Maybe we'll see a bit of a difference when it comes to risk appetite in order to you know, to compete.
So you know, there's a lot of things coming together at this moment in time. There's the reality that some of the things I'm hearing out there, it's like, you know, people telling you to concentrate on unit economics and all that, and you know, some of the, you know, the VCs, you know, talking about at the end of the day, their model is to go for outliers who are going to bring them back 100x their investment, at least at seed level, at least. And so suddenly there's a bit of schizophrenia there, where they're saying that, and at the same time they want to go for lower risk. But the reality is, if you want those 100x, you're going to have to take risk, because they're outliers. So you've got to predict on outliers. And at the moment, I think there's a whole kind of, a lot of investors are a bit lost. So they're like, okay, can you take a safer route? But how can you take a safer route and aim to go for that, you know, 200 million revenue? You don't get there by obviously you get there by being safe, but as an investor, they're not going to get there by making safe investments. They've got to go for outliers. So I think that there's a better understanding in the US, but then again, I'm not there at this moment in time, and I haven't spoken to many US VCs at this particular moment in time, and so to understand whether they're going through this same kind of mind shift or you know, lost a little bit in the approach to their investments. Are they hedging with lower risk and therefore lower appetite for growth, and hoping that there might be an outlier there? I don't know.
I think, you know, time will tell. History will write itself. Cyrus, we've covered a lot today. From you know, from your early entrepreneurial days to, you know, the marketing and funnel activities and the love for incrementals, indirect sales, and then to the huge problem that you're solving with Sleepyhead in terms of really addressing insomnia, which is faced by 500 million adults, or 10% of the population. A huge problem. Really looking forward to seeing how the mobile app continues to drive positive and strong outcomes, particularly through the push notifications.
I'll revert back in the comment section. I'll make sure to keep them updated.
No, indeed. I just wanted to see if there's anything else that you wanted to discuss, or any points that you wanted to provide the audience before we wrap up.
No, I just my point is, if you're an entrepreneur and you've built something, just be passionate about helping whoever it is you've decided to help, and understand what their problem is and how you can solve it. Dive really, really deep, and success will come. And I'd like to say to anyone out there who's listening, who's working for someone, or wants to be an entrepreneur, or tired of what they do, give it a shot, and do things in the health tech space. If you're passionate about business, there's a lot of fantastic, people in medicine who want to change the world, and who don't have the business side.
Yes.
And there's so much to be done. Change the world, make it a better place. And today, all of us can really do it. It's, just concentrate on making the world a better place for someone, and repeat that again and again. And I just hope more people are going to get out there and solve these massive problems that we have in society, for equality of chances for people in society, for access to health, access, having a clean environment. So, I hope that we really have a whole bunch of people who are going to get out there and make the world a better place.
Absolutely. Very inspirational and wise words, Cyrus. And I think that, through tech and the scale that it brings, it could be a reality.
Yeah, hope so.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Lucas, thank you very much. Thanks for all. I'm sure we could have spoken for a couple more hours, and we started diving into some of the stuff that we enjoy talking about the last time we spoke. So thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. To be repeated.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Cyrus.